In a top-secret military facility buried deep beneath the Nevada desert, engineers are racing against time to solve a problem that could determine the outcome of the next global conflict. And the solution they desperately need isn't uranium, plutonium, or some exotic rare earth element. It's silver. While most people think of silver as just jewelry or maybe an investment hedge against inflation, the United States military consumes millions of ounces of this metal every single year for weapon systems, surveillance technology, and communications equipment that would be completely useless without it. Right now, as tensions escalate between superpowers and the race for technological supremacy intensifies, silver has quietly become one of the most strategically critical materials on planet Earth, and almost nobody outside of defense circles understands just how dependent modern warfare has become on this shiny metal that has been valued by humans for 5,000 years. Every cruise missile, every advanced radar system, every satellite, every drone, every piece of electronic warfare equipment relies on silver's unique properties that cannot be replicated by any other element on the periodic table. But here's the terrifying part that should keep you awake at night. Nearly 70% of the world's silver production comes from just 7 countries, several of which are not exactly friendly to Western interests, creating a supply chain vulnerability that defense strategists are only now beginning to fully comprehend. What I'm about to reveal will forever change how you think about this metal, because silver isn't just a commodity or a store of value. It's the invisible thread holding together the entire infrastructure of 21st century technological civilization. And if that thread gets cut, the consequences would be catastrophic beyond anything most people can imagine. Let me take you back to 1942, when American military planners were frantically trying to scale up production of radar systems that would give Allied forces a decisive advantage in World War II. The engineers hit a brick wall almost immediately because the radar components required electrical conductivity far superior to copper, which was the standard conductor used in most electrical applications. They needed something that could carry electrical signals with minimal resistance even at high frequencies, something that could be formed into precise shapes, and something that wouldn't corrode or degrade under extreme conditions. Silver was the only answer, and it became so critical to the war effort that the United States government borrowed over 15,000 tons of silver from the Treasury's reserves to use in the Manhattan Project and various military applications. That silver was eventually returned. But the lesson was learned. Silver possesses a unique combination of properties that make it irreplaceable in certain critical applications. And in times of war, whoever controls the silver supply has a strategic advantage that can mean the difference between victory and defeat. Fast forward to today, and the situation has become exponentially more complex, because silver's industrial applications have multiplied 1,000-fold while the easily accessible reserves are being depleted at an alarming rate. I hope you're doing well. If you like my video, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon for more video notifications. The reason silver has become an industrial weapon in the modern era comes down to a combination of physical properties that sound mundane but are actually extraordinary. Silver is the most electrically conductive element known to science, meaning it carries electrical current more efficiently than any other metal, including copper and gold. It's also the most thermally conductive, making it essential for applications where heat dissipation is critical. It has the lowest contact resistance of any metal, which is crucial for switches and connectors that need to operate reliably over millions of cycles. It's highly reflective across the entire spectrum of light, making it indispensable for mirrors, solar panels, and optical systems. It's naturally antibacterial, which is increasingly important in medical applications and water purification. And perhaps most importantly for military applications, it's extremely resistant to corrosion and oxidation, meaning it maintains its properties even in harsh environments like salt water, extreme temperatures, and high radiation. No other element combines all these properties in one package, and scientists have tried for decades to find substitutes that could match even half of what silver does. But they failed every single time because the laws of physics don't allow for shortcuts. Now let's talk about where this critical metal is being used in ways that would shock the average person who thinks silver is just for coins and jewelry. Every single smartphone on the planet contains between half a gram to a full gram of silver in its circuitry, connectors, and switches. With over 1.5 billion smartphones manufactured annually, that's roughly 2,000 tons of silver being consumed by just this one product category every year. Solar panels, which governments around the world are installing at breakneck speed to meet renewable energy targets, use massive amounts of silver for the photovoltaic cells that convert sunlight into electricity. Each panel requires about 20 grams of silver, and with global solar installations expected to exceed 200 gigawatts annually, we're talking about another 3,000 tons of silver being consumed just for solar energy. Electric vehicles, which are supposed to save the planet from fossil fuels, require 2 to 3 times more silver than traditional cars because of all the electronic components, sensors, and battery management systems. The average EV uses between 25 to 50 grams of silver, and with EV production projected to hit 20 million units annually by 2030, that's another 500 to 1,000 tons of annual demand. Medical applications are consuming increasing amounts because silver's antibacterial properties make it ideal for wound dressings, surgical instruments, and medical devices. Water purification systems, RFID tags, conductive inks, LED lighting, touchscreens, and literally thousands of other applications are all pulling from the same finite pool of silver supply. But the military and defense applications are where things get really interesting and deeply concerning from a strategic perspective. Modern radar systems, which are essential for air defense, missile guidance, and surveillance, rely heavily on silver because the radar waves operate at frequencies where only silver provides the necessary conductivity and signal integrity. A single advanced radar installation can contain hundreds of pounds of silver in its waveguides, switches, and circuitry. Missile systems, both offensive and defensive, use silver extensively in their guidance systems, fuses, and electronic components. The infrared sensors that allow missiles to track targets require silver coatings to function properly. Communications equipment used by military forces worldwide depends on silver contacts and connectors to maintain signal reliability in battlefield conditions where failure is not an option. Satellites, which are the backbone of modern military command and control, use silver for their solar panels, circuitry, and thermal management systems. A single military satellite can contain over 50 pounds of silver, and with thousands of satellites in orbit and hundreds more being launched every year, this represents a massive ongoing demand. Electronic warfare systems that jam enemy communications or spoof radar use specialized silver components that can't be substituted with cheaper alternatives. Even conventional ammunition has started incorporating silver in advanced fusing systems and guidance packages that turn dumb bullets into smart munitions. Here's where the strategic vulnerability becomes absolutely critical and why smart governments are quietly stockpiling silver while they still can. The global silver market is relatively small compared to other industrial metals, with annual mine production of only about 800 million ounces, or roughly 25,000 tons. That sounds like a lot, until you realize that industrial demand alone now exceeds 600 million ounces annually, and it's growing at 5 to 7% per year, driven by solar, electronics, and EVs. Investment demand adds another 100 to 200 million ounces depending on market conditions. That means the market is in a structural deficit, consuming more silver than is being mined, with the difference being made up by recycling and above-ground stocks that are being rapidly depleted. But here's the kicker that should terrify anyone thinking about supply chains. Over 70% of silver production comes as a byproduct of mining other metals like copper, lead, and zinc. This means that silver supply is not responsive to silver prices in the way that most commodities are. If the price of oil doubles, oil companies drill more wells and increase production. If the price of silver doubles, it doesn't significantly increase silver production because the miners are primarily focused on extracting copper or zinc, and the silver just comes along for the ride. The geographic concentration of silver production creates a geopolitical nightmare scenario that defense planners are gaming out behind closed doors. Mexico produces about 23% of global silver. Peru produces another 18%. China controls about 12%. And then you have smaller but significant production in Australia, Chile, Russia, and Poland. Notice anything concerning about that list? Several of those countries have complicated relationships with the United States and its allies, and in the event of a major geopolitical crisis or conflict, supply chains could be cut off virtually overnight. China has already demonstrated its willingness to use resource dominance as a weapon by restricting rare earth exports during trade disputes, and there's no reason to think they would not do the same with silver if strategic calculations dictated it. Russia, which produces about 5% of global silver, is already under heavy sanctions, and has shown it will weaponize commodity exports when it suits their interests. Even friendly countries like Mexico could face internal instability or political changes that disrupt supply. The United States itself produces only about 3% of global silver, nowhere near enough to meet domestic industrial and military needs, making America heavily dependent on imports for material that's essential to national security. The recycling situation offers some hope, but also reveals troubling realities about how silver is being consumed. Unlike gold, which is almost entirely recycled because it's used primarily for jewelry and investment, where the metal can be recovered and reused indefinitely, silver is often used in tiny quantities dispersed across millions of products in ways that make recovery economically impossible. The silver in your smartphone theoretically could be recycled, but the cost of extracting half a gram of silver from a complex electronic device that also contains copper, gold, plastics, and rare earths is often higher than the value of the recovered silver. Solar panels are designed to last 25 to 30 years, meaning the silver in them is locked away for decades before it can potentially be recovered. And even then, the recycling infrastructure doesn't really exist at scale. Some industrial applications, like photography, used to consume massive amounts of silver that were then recycled when the film was processed. But digital photography killed that entire cycle. Medical applications often involve silver being discarded as biohazard waste. The military tends not to recycle sensitive equipment because of security concerns about classified technology falling into the wrong hands. All of this means that a substantial portion of silver being consumed today is effectively being removed from circulation permanently or for very long periods, tightening the supply situation even further. The price dynamics of silver have been distorted and suppressed for decades by factors that are finally starting to break down. And when they do, the impact on industries and militaries worldwide will be profound. Silver has historically traded at a gold to silver ratio of around 15-1, meaning it took 15 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. This ratio was based on the relative abundance of the metals in the Earth's crust and their historical monetary relationship. Today, that ratio fluctuates between 60-1 and 80-1, suggesting that silver is dramatically undervalued relative to gold. Some of this distortion comes from gold's monetary role as a central bank reserve asset, while silver lost that status decades ago. But a larger factor is the paper silver market, where banks and traders exchange contracts representing silver without any physical metal changing hands. The size of the paper market dwarfs the physical market by ratios of 100-1 or more, allowing prices to be influenced by financial speculation rather than physical supply and demand. This has kept silver prices artificially low for years, which has been great for industrial users who got cheap inputs but terrible for mining companies who couldn't justify investments in new silver production because prices didn't support it. The result is an industry that has underinvested in exploration and development for over a decade, setting up a supply crunch that's now beginning to materialize. What happens when this supply-demand imbalance finally breaks into the open and silver prices spike to levels that reflect true scarcity? The implications cascade through every industry and military in ways that most people haven't begun to consider. Solar panel manufacturers would face soaring input costs that could slow the renewable energy transition that governments have committed trillions of dollars to achieve. Electronics companies would see their margins compressed or would have to raise prices on everything from phones to computers to televisions. The EV revolution could stumble if silver costs make electric vehicles significantly more expensive than projections assumed. But the real crisis would be in defense and military applications, where silver is not optional, it's essential, and where cost is secondary to capability. If an advanced radar system requires 500 pounds of silver, the military will pay whatever it takes to get that silver, because the alternative is having inferior defense capabilities that could cost lives and lose wars. This inelastic demand from military and defense sectors could drive silver prices to levels that seem absurd by today's standards, but would be entirely rational if you're choosing between paying $1,000 an ounce for silver or having your missile defense system fail when it's needed most. Smart countries are already positioning themselves for this reality by securing long-term supply agreements, stockpiling physical metal, investing in domestic mining capabilities, and developing strategic reserves similar to the petroleum reserves that most nations maintain. China has been particularly aggressive about this, using its state-owned enterprises to lock up silver production around the world through mining investments and long-term purchase contracts. They understand that in a world increasingly dependent on high-tech weapon systems, renewable energy, and electronic infrastructure, controlling silver supply is a form of leverage that can be as powerful as controlling oil or semiconductors. The United States, despite its historical awareness of silver's strategic importance going back to World War II, has been astonishingly complacent about securing supply chains, relying on the assumption that markets will always provide adequate supplies at reasonable prices. That assumption is about to be tested in ways that could prove costly. The investment implications are staggering for anyone paying attention to these dynamics. Silver is currently trading at around $25 to $30 per ounce, levels that barely cover the all-in production costs for many miners once you account for exploration, development, and sustaining capital. With demand growing at 5 to 7% annually, supply flat or declining, recycling unable to make up the difference, and strategic stockpiling beginning to ramp up, the setup for a price explosion is arguably stronger than it's been in 50 years. Unlike most commodities, where high prices eventually cure themselves by stimulating new production and destroying demand, silver faces the unique situation where new production takes years to develop, and much of the demand is inelastic because it comes from applications where there are no substitutes. You can't make a radar system work with aluminum or copper when the physics require silver. You can't make solar panels competitive without silver because alternative conductors reduce efficiency below economic viability. This creates the potential for price moves that would shock people accustomed to thinking of silver as a sleepy, precious metal that occasionally gets speculative attention. The geopolitical implications extend far beyond just market prices and military capabilities. Control of silver supply chains could become a bargaining chip in international negotiations, a tool of economic warfare, and a determinant of which nations can build out the infrastructure needed for the 21st century economy. Imagine a scenario where China, which already dominates rare earths and has significant influence over silver production, decides to restrict exports of silver to Western nations during a crisis over Taiwan or the South China Sea. Suddenly, American defense contractors can't get the silver they need for missile production. Solar installations grind to a halt, and electronics manufacturers face critical shortages. This isn't science fiction, it's a very plausible scenario that wargamers and strategic planners are actively modeling. The response options are limited because you can't conjure silver out of thin air, you can't substitute inferior alternatives in critical applications, and you can't ramp up production overnight when it takes 5 to 10 years to develop a new mine from discovery to production. Silver is not just a metal, it's an industrial weapon. In the most literal sense, a material so critical to modern technological civilization that losing access to it would cripple economies and militaries within months. The coming years will reveal whether the world has enough silver to meet exploding demand from solar, electronics, EVs, and military applications, or whether we're heading toward a supply crisis that forces painful choices about which applications get priority. Smart investors, strategic planners, and forward-thinking nations are positioning themselves now. While most people are still thinking of silver as just shiny jewelry or an inflation hedge, the truth is far more consequential, and those who understand it have a chance to profit enormously while also protecting themselves against a future where this critical material becomes the most fought-over resource in a world increasingly defined by technological competition and strategic rivalry.